Well, hello, everyone. This is John Byrne with Poets&Quants. We have a special fireside chat, without a fire, of course, with Diana Robertson, who is the Vice Dean and Director of Wharton's Undergraduate Division, and a special guest with her, Eric Furda, who is, in fact, the Director of Admissions at Penn. He's held that position for 12 years. He's leaving at the end of this year, but he knows more about college admissions than probably anybody on this planet. In fact, Eric, you host a Sirius XM show called The Process about selection at highly selective colleges, yes?
Correct. We're on Sirius XM Stars 109. And what's great about that, John, is I have a co-host who is the Dean of College Counseling at the Dwight Englewood School. So we get both sides of the desk, which is really fun.
Oh, that's great. I have to tune into that. I haven't discovered it until I looked you up and read a lot about you. Well, Diana, it's such a pleasure to see you again. Last time we were having a coffee in San Francisco.
That's right.
And it was just before, I think, you were going to be named Vice Dean. I should tell everyone that Diana is a master teacher. She's won 7 teaching awards. She's a professor of legal studies and business ethics, and for many years has taught organizational business ethics at Wharton. So welcome. And just a little side note, little piece of trivia, Diana's husband had been the dean of the Wharton Business School for a number of years, and had also been dean at Emory's Goizueta Business School, and is a terrific academic leader, and I feel privileged to have known him. So let's start with the basics. There's no doubt that Wharton is the creme de la creme in business undergraduate education for sure. You're ranked first by just about everybody, including us. So what are the ingredients? What are the ingredients of the Wharton experience that make it so good?
Well, thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. Yes, when I had coffee with you in San Francisco, I knew I was going to be Vice Dean, but I couldn't tell you.
That's right.
So now, and then of course it's all unfolded since then. And yes, I've had the privilege of being Vice Dean of the Wharton undergraduate program for the past year. And what a year it has been, as everyone knows that we sent our students home at spring break and everything changed. And I know everything changed in everybody's world. But to your question, I think the ingredients are going to sound simple, but in a way they're not. So we'll start with world-class faculty. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a senior at Wharton who told me, I chose Wharton for its academic caliber. And I think that sums it up. That's our faculty, that's our curriculum. Then we have a dedicated staff who've really risen to the occasion with COVID, particularly our computing staff. You can imagine they've been busy 24/7. We have a network of over 100,000 Wharton alumni in 153 countries. So we have a network that's ready to go. But the most important thing is our students. And I have Eric Furda to thank for that. So thank you, Eric, because Eric is the one who admits the students, and they are amazing. I say this all the time, and I've actually had somebody tell me, why do you keep saying they're amazing? And it's because they are. If any of them dropped in right now, any one student into our webinar and told you their story, you'd agree with me.
And you look at any tangible evidence of the quality of the students, and it's there, whether it's a standardized test score, a GPA, a high school class standing, but that only tells you a very little part of the story, because the real quality is in the intangible things that can't be measured by someone on the outside, that are in fact measured by Eric and his team.
Right. Well, and I've taught these students, as you mentioned, I've taught business ethics to our Wharton undergrads for years. And I've taught an international chess champion who he donated his winnings to a school in Haiti.
Wow.
I've taught a violinist who played at Carnegie Hall. I've taught a young man from China who wanted to go to medical school so he could go back to his village where there's no healthcare. He's now at Columbia Medical School. I've taught a young woman who started her own business to empower high school women. I've taught students who can't afford course packs in my course. And of course, we have an emergency fund for that, thank goodness. And I've taught a woman who's passionate about becoming a high school math teacher. So it's not that everyone is the same in their interests or their ambitions. And that is really the beauty of it. It's the diversity on every possible dimension.
And yours is a direct admit program, and it's important for parents and high schoolers to know the distinction between a direct admit program and one where you're admitted to the university first, and then you have to apply again to a business school as a rising junior, where you have to pass 2 hurdles instead of just 1. Another important thing to note is that 1/3 of the classes that you will take in the Wharton program are outside Wharton.
Right.
Because there are a lot of people who would say, oh, well, you know, you may not know that you want to be in business and you should have a more liberal arts education. And I actually think that's not really true, because every undergraduate business education gives you a good dose of liberal arts and sciences. And that's definitely true at Wharton. I think there are 22 courses in business, 10 in liberal arts and sciences, and then 5 on restrictive electives that every Wharton undergraduate student gets to take.
You've done your homework, John. I like it.
I absolutely.
Well, that is the most important point, is that our Wharton students are Penn students.
Yes.
And Eric can speak more to that and about how they're admitted. But it's just, our students join the 100+ Penn clubs. They take advantage of all the Penn speakers. There's such a wide array of opportunity. Of course, there's a lot of opportunity at Wharton, but then you add in everything at Penn and you have such an enriching experience.
Yes. So Eric, in evaluating someone who wants to go to Wharton, is there different criteria for a Wharton undergrad admit versus a general Penn admit, or is the criteria the same?
Well, there's a couple different pieces that we could bring you inside here, John. And I really have to say, when I speak to audiences, I love talking about curriculum. I have a blog that's called Page 217. There's C's on it: culture, curriculum. So I think outside of myself and, you know, some of the advisors in Wharton undergraduate division actually breaks down the curriculum the way that you did. And I absolutely love that, because, you know, unlike students who may find that path later on, you know, versus a high school student that has to make this decision, we hope they know what they're getting themselves into and that they're embracing it. And maybe another example to this is engineering, where students may feel they want to study computer science, but because they've coded, they've had, you know, maybe they've even created an app, and maybe then they should be, you know, within the Wharton school. It's for high school students, it's a big ask, John, to say, you know, I want to do something so specific at this point that my college application is going to check that box, which is the way Penn is designed, though. So to answer your question, you know, for the University of Pennsylvania overall, I think we're looking for a lot of the same elements, you know, in terms of students who are certainly achieving at a very high level, and you cited, you know, different statistics on that, while also just that embrace of learning. You know, you want students who are going to be inquisitive, and, you know, that's not captured by a GPA sometimes, right? You want the students who are going to engage with our faculty truly. And I feel that next level in terms of evaluating students for the Wharton School is that, okay, the quantitative preparation certainly needs to be there, you know, to an extent, because that's what the curriculum looks like, right? And so, you know, having some exposure to calculus, what calculus is offered within a school too, but making sure that there's exposure there. And then you get the students who are taking BC calculus and multivariable, you know, and differential equations. Obviously, some students in, you know, certain high schools have access to very advanced, you know, topics within that area. But then, as you said, it gets into those intangibles, you know, and I'll bring up too, and we ask these questions all the time, and you certainly ask these questions all the time. You know, what does leadership look like, really, and how do you capture that? And what does teamwork look like? Now, that's not automatically saying captain of the women's lacrosse team. You have leadership and you know how to work on a team. But when you look at the curriculum and students working together, that's a hard thing to do. A lot of students in high school can work through and cover the topics, right, and maybe even embrace the learning, but certainly, you know, go through the course and be successful in it, while we're looking for students who are going to be able to work with and engage with one another. And maybe that's a little bit more subjective because you're pulling it from different parts of the application, like letters of recommendations. So, of course, the talent is going to be there at some level, while also how you engage with that talent is what we're looking for. Particularly in a class size that's fewer than 400 students in the incoming class at Wharton.
Now, Eric, you made a really interesting point, which is it's hard to know as a junior or even a senior in high school what you really want to do with your life and to pick business as your path, right?
Right.
So Diana, are there things that a parent or a junior should know to help them get on that path? Or is it just a question of some people are more directed and they have a goal and it's early and they know they want to do this and maybe they were influenced by their parents or a relative or a friend and then it just happens?
Well, I certainly think it's both. So
Yeah.
we have about 50%, slightly over 50% of our graduates go into finance, and we are known for our finance program, but there's another 49% who are pursuing consulting or technology or all kinds of other careers. So it is a combination. I meet students who from day one, they know exactly what they want to do and they've got it all mapped out. And I sometimes try to gently talk to them about, there are other options. Have you really thought about this? And you mentioned leadership. We, as part of our curriculum, which is relatively new, it's now 4 years old, but we have a series of courses that are called the Leadership Journey. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to develop effective, ethical, of course I'll have to say ethical, leaders who are making responsible decisions for business and society. And it starts in their first year. All our first year students take a course called Wharton 101, which is called Business and You. I happen to lead this course, so I have a lot to say about it.
Oh, great.
I'll try to keep it short. But the You part is in recitation sections where students are really delving into who they are. What is their purpose? What are their values? How do they see themselves? And trying to get them to think through, not just, oh, I came to Wharton because of this or that, but is that really going to fit with who I am and who I want to be? And then in the sophomore year, they take a business communications course, which is in very small classes, about 8 or 9 people. So they really develop and practice their communication skills, also obviously part of being a leader. And then junior year, they take a course on teams, on how to be a part of a team, how to manage a team, how to work with a diverse team. So we're trying to look at all the components of leadership and take them through this sequence. And then senior year, they do a capstone. This will be our first year with our students taking a senior capstone, which is an array of possible courses where they apply all the knowledge that they've gained to a particular problem. It's meant to be an integrative course. So leadership is very much on our minds.
Yeah, and I love that right from the start. You're encouraging this introspection for very young people who, probably haven't had a lot of time to sit back and say, what are my skills? Who am I? What do I want to become? And asking some tough questions of them very early on. The other thing that it kind of intrigues me is the fact that you highlight what would ordinarily in business be called soft skills. Because we know that, if you graduate from Wharton, we're gonna make an assumption that the technical skills are there. And so we also know that a lot of success in business is focused on soft skills. Can you lead? Can you work with others? How well do you collaborate and get the best result? So I kind of really like that you're leading with that leadership journey and talking so much about that. So we all know, look, the business world is incredibly dynamic. It's fast changing. Unpredictable things happen all the time. The pandemic is great evidence of that. How do you prepare students for this incredibly ever-changing world, for the new technologies that are going to shape it with artificial intelligence and machine learning, the new emphasis on data analytics, because there are massive data sets that companies don't know what to do with and they can't harness it for decision making. How do you address these issues?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned particularly AI, because we have a new AI, artificial intelligence course.
I know that.
Oh, see, you really have done your homework. And this is what we do, is we evolve, and we need to. And Wharton is the first collegiate business school. We started in 1881, but we're hardly going to rest on our laurels. We have, in addition to the AI course, we have a new data science for finance course, our business analytics concentration, and students can take one of about 20 concentrations. It's relatively new. It's 3 years old. It's become one of the most popular concentrations after finance and management. And analytics is everywhere in our curriculum. It's really, I was going to say amazing, but I say amazing way too much. So I'll reserve that for our students because they deserve it. But it's the thought that we have to prepare these students for jobs and even industries that don't exist today. And how do you do that? Yes, we can give them certain skills, but we also have to help them understand the importance of agility and being able to pivot and explore new options. And that's part of what I am trying to instill in our students. Before COVID, I wrote my vision. Vision's a very grandiose word, but and of course I had to have an acronym because we love our acronyms at Wharton. So my vision is PACT: purpose, agility, community, and technology. And when COVID hit, I thought, whoa, we have all become agile. So maybe we don't have to focus on that one so much, and maybe we don't have to focus on technology so much, but we really have to focus on community. How do you build community in a remote world? And two of our priorities in the undergraduate division are diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think obviously is part of community, and also student well-being. We're not going to have students who have robust mental health if they don't feel like they belong and if they don't feel like they're connected. And we're working very hard to build platforms for them to connect. But at the same time, the students are so much better at it than we are. They have Zoom yoga classes together. They have Zoom movie nights together. And I really depend on them to be building community in this new era. And we're doing it. But the agility is where I started, and that's around your question about how do we prepare students for this incredibly fast-changing world.
I also think you're so, your bench strength even in faculty and the expertise you have across a faculty that's in excess of 200 professors allows you to actually dive deep into almost any topic. I mean, you referred to 20 different concentrations. I would say there aren't a whole lot of schools that actually have 20 separate concentrations in their undergraduate business program. And even though, you know, obviously Wharton is known as a place where finance is number one, the truth is you have experts in every single department. And I know that by looking at your job report from last year, you know, people went into 35 job functions in 18 different industries with an average starting salary of 82,000 plus, which is, that's a testament to the diversity of both the people you bring in, but also your faculty and the expertise you have across it. So if a simple question for someone who maybe is interested in a business education but isn't sure, what would you say is the true value of an undergraduate business degree?
Well, I know we have parents listening, so I'm going to put this in parent terms and say Wharton is a sound investment. And we are all concerned about escalating tuition costs everywhere. And people may think that because Penn's an Ivy League school, that it's not affordable. Well, it is affordable. And again, Eric can speak to that. We have needs-blind admission. We have a commitment to meet the demonstrated financial need of any student. So it's affordable. But that's just on the front end. Now, let's talk about the back end. And I'm glad you mentioned that $82,000 starting salary, because I was going to mention it, but that just makes me sound so Wharton that I have to talk about money.
And I'm not even going to mention signing bonuses.
Right. But our students, they are loved by recruiters.
Yeah.
2019 graduates, 92% have jobs within 6 months of graduation. And those are good jobs. It's not just that they've gotten a job as a barista at Starbucks. Sorry, I don't mean to denigrate that. But, and the recruiters love our students. They hit the ground running, and they have, as you say, John, they have all the technical skills. But we're also told that they do have some of these softer communication skills. I taught organizational behavior for years before I'm more exclusively teaching ethics now. And you would always get students who'd say, oh, this is soft stuff. And then they come back 10 years later and say, I wish I'd paid more attention to what you said about motivating your employees.
Yeah.
Because this is what is, as you know, and what they don't necessarily appreciate as undergrads is this is what's going to get you ahead in business, are those people.
True. Really true. Now, Eric, obviously parents often play a role in offering guidance, support, and maybe even more. That term helicopter parents has been around for a long time. I think there's an even more extreme example of a helicopter parent, and I'm sure that you've, during your many years in admissions, have come across a few. What's the sort of appropriate role, really, for a parent in helping a young child through this transition to adulthood? Because essentially that's what the transition to college is.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm really proud that I co-authored a book that's coming out late September 22nd, with Jacques Steinberg, and it's called The College Conversation, and it's specifically written for parents to think about how they could help guide their children, not in an overly, in a helicopter way, but, to help that child get license and independence. Because, John, as you brought up the transition, that's actually one of the phases that we went over in the book. It's that transition process into college through the first year, and to have healthy conversations, to be able to go back to something that you already spoke about, kind of like that leadership journey, that personal inventory.
Right.
What are my ideas? What's my identity? What are my interests? How do I translate those into then, the type of college that I'm looking for, centered around curriculum and community, which we talk about in the book and also on my blog, because so you're hitting these words that are so important. And what we're trying to do here and through this conversation is help parents facilitate those conversations, because, well, what do they really mean? Okay, they're talking about community. What do they really mean? And so trying to really understand the purpose of this type of learning environment and, what the aim of it is. And when you brought up our faculty as an example, within Wharton specifically, the fact that they teach PhD, master's level, and undergraduate students, and you use the term, they can go really deep if they want to, while also understanding that these are foundational courses as well. So I think for families, it's just being open with each other. Actually, I have another book right here that we referenced. It's in its 10th edition, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, by Stone, Patton, and Heen. It's one of those books that so many individuals have been influenced by, and these conversations can have anxiety around them. So we want to make sure that you can have these conversations as family members and be supportive of one another. But that's not always easy, and so you have to see where you're on the same page and maybe where your ideas kind of are not connecting together.
So Eric, in the process of writing the book, I'm curious about this. Did any of your views change?
That's a great question. I think it certainly tested a lot of assumptions that we both had, that both Jacques and I had, about higher education as an example. We didn't go in and say, okay, this is the exact book that we're going to write. And we ended up going on a very long journey, even talking about trade school and community colleges and military, just what what does learning look like? And certainly as we sit at the University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School, you know, we could have certain assumptions about what learning looks like and what credentialing looks like. And really the assumptions that we tested were, you know, this is just one small slice of it, four-year education, or at least going from high school immediately into college. So I think that's where we got pushed the most.
That's great. Now, Diana, what are the things
Say
about?
something about, because I have 3 grown children. So,
Oh yes, you've been through the process on the other side.
right. So I'd love to answer the question as best I can. I think one of the things that parents always talk about is pick your battles with your child. But this is also, I think it's the moment where you pick your guiding moments versus your listening moments. And you really want to listen to your student. You really want to understand what they're saying and not just jump in and say, oh, but did you think about this? And I'm not touting myself as an expert on parenting by any means, but I have been through this. And I see this with our students, that many of them will come in and say, but my mother wants me to do this, or my father wants me to do this. And then I just would encourage parents to really listen to what your student wants. You've gotten your child, now you're a young adult, to this stage. Think of what you've done. You guided them to the being 18 or 19 years old. They are fully formed people with their own views and their own desire for autonomy. And that's an important point.
And sometimes you need to let them make mistakes.
That's right. That's right. And that's hard. That's hard not to jump in.
Yes. Well, you know, there are little mistakes and there are big mistakes. The little mistakes, let them have them. But you're so right about the listening, because even I have to admit myself, it's hard to hold back sometimes, you know, and what's right for us as parents, having gone through the experience before, but before was different, incidentally, than today. You're right, we kind of need to hold back and let them articulate where they are, even when they're uncertain, and let them struggle a little bit with themselves instead of interfere and get overly involved, particularly in the beginning, I think. Yeah. You know, a lot of people may have the misconception that if you go and get an undergraduate business degree, you come out prepared to make a real quick start in a job, but you may have to forego some of the other experiences that a liberal arts or science person might have. And that's not true. 25% of your students study abroad, for example.
Right. Well, they did.
Yeah, almost as many
They
have a minor at Wharton. Over 30% apparently graduate with more than one undergraduate degree. So you have a very ambitious, studious bunch that's taking full advantage of the undergraduate experience, not a bunch of people who just are headlong running into Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley.
No, that's right. And they change. They'll change their minds too at certain points. So we have about a third of our students go back and get an MBA, and they have a head start if they get an MBA. But we also have large numbers of students who go to law school and medical school and pursue other disciplines. I just wrote a recommendation for a woman who got into the master's program in statistics at Yale.
Oh, wow.
And those kinds of stories are what I don't think is necessarily captured in some of our information that's put out by Wharton.
How does a person change from being admitted to being a graduate of the Wharton School? I mean, you've seen this transformation as a professor, and now as dean, although you've only been dean for a little over a year, you haven't seen the full cycle as dean, but you certainly have seen it throughout your whole career. What's the difference between someone who is just showing up on campus for the first day of class and someone who's wearing a graduation gown who just accepted their diploma?
Well, I hope that it goes back to PACT. I hope they've developed their purpose. I hope they really understand who they are. And I think that's such a big part of it. It is so interesting to watch these students develop. As I said, I was on a call with a senior yesterday, and she just had all these really mature things to say. And I'm thinking, I didn't know you as a first year but I am sure that you have come a long way since the first year. But also, our first years are kind of in awe of upperclassmen. When I've taught business ethics, often the classroom would have all the full range, all 4 years of students. And the seniors have had internships and they have a lot of collective wisdom and experience, and they're able to impart that. So you certainly, you see the maturity and you see the learning in the seniors. And that's what I would hope, that everyone finds their own path and that they're comfortable with who they are and what they've chosen. And I see that development. I can't wait till I've been in this job for 4 years, because then I spent a lot of time with first years last year. And particularly first semester, because that's the course I was teaching. And that was all 671 of our first year students. And the things that they're anxious about, they were anxious about, can I get into the right club? And then you talk to juniors and they say, oh, I'm so over clubs. I don't do that anymore. But it's just, you see the development kind of right before your eyes. You see people changing, and it's really gratifying.
That's fantastic. I also think self-confidence, not cockiness, but self-confidence is an important ingredient for success no matter what you do in life. And I think that a solid undergraduate experience where you're an involved, active participant in the community, taking advantage of what a real college experience can be, develops its self-confidence that this foundation of a successful path is really true. I'm sure now, Eric, in evaluating applicants beyond the obvious, a GPA, a standardized test score, you mentioned early on in our conversations the importance of collaborative work and how you might judge that plus leadership potential. And I'm thinking, I mean, the most obvious place to see that would be in extracurricular activities, whether you've held leadership positions on a athletic team, on a newspaper, on some sort of club where you actually made a difference as opposed to just were a member. Is that what you're looking at too?
I think that there's a combination of those factors. And I think the student who seems to be involved across a range of activities and they are the leader in something, in all those areas, you're going to say, okay, there's certainly leadership here. It could also raise a few other questions though, too, right? I think, and there's no formula for this for our listeners right now. That being said, there has to be this combination of knowing when to step forward, but then also when to step back and listen. We were talking about listening before, trying to take things in. So certainly there isn't, any one size fits all on any of this, and students are going to be who they are and get engaged with, hopefully for the reasons that they want to be engaged with something. But I feel like it's a combination. You can't always be the one up front there, or maybe that's that handful of people. And Diana can probably choose those students, across the school who seem to be, okay, they're always the ones out front, while also recognizing that you need people to carry different roles within a team. And, I'd like to go back to something else that you spoke about, because I think this is really important as we talk about this leadership and facilitating. It's not a mistake that students learn from one another. You have a peer advising system, within the undergraduate schools. You have peer facilitators and conversations through other organizations, including the college houses, which are going to become even more important because we're still building community around these college houses, even though the students aren't together. And so, how can you facilitate some of those conversations? That's really important, and learn from those who are just a few years older than you, but they have that maturity, as Diana said, through experience. And so I think all of these things do come together. For high school students, let's face it, there's only so much you can do. Even in the best of schools, kind of the range in front of you is still fairly limited, compared to a college environment. But it's how you really take full advantage of those opportunities that matter. And I'll just give you one other. I know that this is a long answer, but I'll give you one other framework. And that is, there's the time, whatever that is, whether you're the lead writer or editor, or you're that, you're that varsity athlete, where you're the one that's looked to, right? You're going to hit that deadline. You're going to have the idea, or you're going to hit that shot at the end. And you want to have some of those experiences and be in that position. And you learn when it works and you learn really when it doesn't work. I then would like to see students have some joy in something that they're not expected to be the person in, the go-to person in.
That's
And
interesting.
so
Yeah.
that's a very different role. And it actually takes off some of the pressure from what we were talking about before, about maybe always needing to perform. And then there's this other area, again, kind of in that extracurricular area where, hopefully, you're finding time, at which families have, right? Family dinners during COVID is probably something that everyone says to you, well, gee, it's nice to have dinner together. Family, faith, community, how does that play in? And I think that goes to Diana's, kind of that larger purpose that a young person may have.
Really true. Diana, last words. What advice do you have for a parent who has a high schooler who has no idea what they want to do? Should they just listen? Or should they start to nudge?
Well, I think they have to ask the right questions, and then they listen to the answer, and that gets back to the family dinner conversations. And I just think it's fine not to know what you want to do. I taught at London Business School for years and lived in England, and the English system, as you know, it's very different. At 17 years old, you apply to university and you're going to read a certain subject. So you're applying in biology or psychology or English, and you're 17 years old. And once you're on that path, it's really hard to change. And you've already pointed out in many ways that even if you're on the Wharton path, that doesn't mean that you're headed to Goldman Sachs, et cetera. So there are lots of avenues that you can explore. But I really think parents can be supportive of the student who doesn't know what they want to do. And I try to talk to students about that too and say, it's okay. You've got a lot of years to figure this out. And that is something about the US system that is so forgiving, because you can go to graduate school in some other area. I talked to my doctor who went to medical school after getting a degree in German and international relations. How does this happen? It doesn't happen in other countries necessarily. Yeah. Again, in England, you study medicine as an undergrad. So I mean, if I could say anything to parents, I'd tell them to try to relax, but I know that's not easy. If you have more than one child, the second child is easier usually.
That is really always true. Exactly.
But no, it's hard. It's hard. You put such an investment into your young person, and it's hard to let go of your own aspirations and not want to direct them to where you think they need to go.
So I'm curious, you have 3 children, right?
Yes.
Did any of them choose business?
Yeah, you have to hear this, John. So 2 of them have Wharton MBAs.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and the third has a PhD in art history.
Oh, wow.
And she was always just, even when my husband and I were teaching at Emory, and as you mentioned, he was the dean there, she stayed so far away from the business school. She was in arts and sciences at Emory. She wouldn't even come to our offices because
wow,
she's just different, and that's wonderful. If I could tell one quick story, because we are such a Wharton family. So this daughter who has the PhD in art history, she has all the Wharton swag that we keep giving her. So she goes to Whole Foods with her Wharton tote bag, and she's checking out, and the checkout person says to her, "Oh, did you go to Wharton?" And she says, "No, but my entire family did." And he said, "Well, that's okay. I didn't go to college either." And of course, she didn't correct him, being who she is, but yeah. It's just, we are such a Wharton family. So sometimes we have to remember that not everybody. Oh, and I also have a daughter-in-law who is a Wharton MBA. So.
Oh, wow.
There we go.
Wow. All right, Diana, thank you so much. Eric, a pleasure to meet you. Good luck on your book.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you joining. And I hope that everyone out there got a lot of good information about, well, if you're a parent, what you should be doing to guide your child in the appropriate manner, as opposed to force feeding your child and pushing them in a direction. I know so many parents want their kids to major in business today because they feel like the cost of education is very high and the return on a business degree is more obvious than it might be on something in geography, philosophy, or in my major, English and political science. I double majored. So I do appreciate the fact that the two of you shed a lot of light on the process and on how valuable a Wharton education can be. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And this
Thank you,
is John
John.
Byrne.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, and this is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Thanks for watching.